In the spring of 1917, northern France was already exhausted by years of war. Along a shallow stretch of trench near a secondary supply road, a small infantry unit was ordered to hold its position. They were told reinforcements would arrive within days. They waited where the maps ended and the messages stopped. By 1917, France had become a landscape shaped entirely by attrition. The Western Front no longer moved in sweeping advances. It shifted by meters. Entire offensives were measured not in victories, but in losses endured. Trench systems had grown dense and confusing, stitched together by narrow communication lines and imperfect maps. Orders traveled slowly. Supplies traveled slower. And men were often sent forward with only partial understanding of what awaited them. The unit stationed near the Forgotten Road was not elite. It was composed of regular French infantry. Men drawn from farming villages, factory towns, and city neighborhoods already emptied by earlier drafts. Their assignment was simple on paper. Hold the sector. Secure the trench. Maintain readiness until reinforcements arrived. The sector itself was considered quiet. Not inactive, but secondary. A place where attention rarely lingered. Command believed the area was stable. Enemy movements had slowed. Artillery was focused elsewhere. The unit's presence was meant to prevent infiltration, not to engage in major fighting. As a result, the soldiers were given limited supplies. Ammunition was adequate but not abundant. Food arrived irregularly. Medical support was minimal. Still, morale held. The men trusted the schedule. Reinforcements were promised. Fresh troops. Additional weapons. Relief. The trenches they occupied were old. Dug earlier in the war. Reinforced with timber that had already begun to rot. Sandbags slumped inward. Duckboards were uneven. Water collected at the bottom, regardless of weather. Rats moved freely. Lice were constant. The men adapted. They always did. Communication with rear command relied on runners and a single field telephone line. The wire was fragile. It had been repaired many times. Each repair assumed it would hold long enough. Reports sent from the trench described calm conditions. Minor artillery at night. Occasional rifle fire. Nothing urgent. Nothing demanding immediate attention. Days passed. Then more days. The promised reinforcements did not arrive, but this was not unusual. Delays were common. The men were told to remain patient, to conserve strength, to maintain their positions. They believed the system still functioned. They did not yet know that elsewhere, priorities had shifted. That offensives planned far from their sector were already absorbing manpower. That replacement units listed for their relief had been redirected. On paper, the sector remained occupied and stable. In reality, it had already begun to disappear from attention. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. Supply deliveries slowed further. Rations were reduced. Ammunition counts were reviewed more often. Patrols reported unfamiliar movement at night. Shapes where there had been none. Sounds that did not match previous patterns. These reports were sent rearward. No response returned. The field telephone line failed during a routine bombardment. It was repaired once. Then again. Then it stopped working entirely. Runners were sent. Some returned late. Some did not return at all. Their absence was noted but not explained. The trench remained manned. Orders had not changed. Enemy artillery began to probe the area more deliberately. Short barrages. Precise testing responses. The unit replied cautiously, conserving shells. They still believed support was nearby. That command was aware that the silence was temporary. As days turned into weeks, fatigue settled into every movement. Watches stretched longer. Sleep came in fragments. Faces grew hollow. Officers reviewed maps that no longer reflected reality. The men repaired the trench with whatever materials remained. Timber scavenged from collapsed sections. Sandbags filled with mud instead of earth. Enemy patrols grew bolder. Wire was cut in places. Listening posts were overrun and abandoned. The unit reported this escalation through every remaining channel. Again, nothing returned. No orders. No acknowledgement. Just silence. The realization came gradually. Not as panic. As wait. Reinforcements were not delayed. They were not coming. The unit had been left in place, unaccounted for. Their position no longer existed in the operational picture. They were holding ground that command had already moved past. A decision had to be made. Hold and wait, as ordered. Or withdraw without authorization. Withdrawal risked court-martial if command still existed. Holding risked annihilation. The officers chose to wait one more day. Then another. Each decision pushed the next closer to collapse. Artillery fire intensified. Trenches caved in. Casualties mounted. Medical supplies were gone. The wounded were kept where they fell. The men stopped counting days. They counted shells. They counted footsteps at night. They counted how many were still standing. The waiting continued. And with it, the certainty that no relief would break the horizon. The final attack did not arrive with warning. There was no prolonged artillery preparation. Only a sudden stillness, followed by movement across ground that had already been measured and tested. The enemy advanced where the trench was weakest. They knew the position was undermanned. They knew there were no reserves behind it. The French soldiers responded with discipline learned through exhaustion. Rifles were raised. Fire was controlled. Ammunition was rationed by instinct rather than order. Some sections held longer than expected. Others collapsed almost immediately as damaged trench walls gave way under pressure. Communication inside the trench broke down within minutes. Officers attempted to move between positions, but narrow passages were blocked by debris and wounded men. Orders were passed by voice, then by gesture, then not at all. Leadership shifted repeatedly as men fell and others stepped forward without ceremony. There was no coordinated counterattack. There could not be. The unit had been holding for weeks without relief. Strength had already been spent on waiting. When the enemy breached the first sections, resistance became isolated and uneven. Each pocket of defense fought on its own, unaware of what remained elsewhere. The lack of reinforcements became undeniable. No supporting fire arrived. No neighboring units appeared on the flanks. The men understood, without being told, that the position no longer existed beyond the trench itself. By the time ammunition ran low, the trench was already fragmented. Some soldiers attempted withdrawal across exposed ground and were cut down. Others remained where they were, fighting until rifles fell silent. A few were taken prisoner. Many did not leave at all. When the firing stopped, the sector was quiet again. The trench was shattered beyond recognition. The road behind it remained empty. Later reports would note a loss of ground. No unit was named. No specific engagement recorded. The men who waited were absorbed into the silence, their stand reduced to an absence on the map. After the fighting ended, the ground changed slowly, almost unwillingly, as if the landscape itself hesitated to accept what had happened. Smoke drifted away and the noise receded, leaving behind not a clear outcome but an emptiness that felt unresolved. The trench line no longer functioned as a position or a boundary. It collapsed inward under its own damage, timber splintered and soaked through, sandbags lost their shape and blended into the mud, and the narrow spaces where men had waited for orders became indistinguishable from the ground itself. Bodies remained where discipline had once held them in place, some buried by debris, others exposed to weather and time, and no markers were set to explain who they were or why they had been there. In the days that followed, the sector was quietly reassigned in official documents. Lines were adjusted. Symbols were moved. The map simplified what the ground had made complicated. The road behind the former position remained open, used by supply wagons and passing units that did not stop or look toward the collapsed trench. No one asked which unit had held it before, because the question no longer existed in the system that moved men and material forward. A small number of survivors reached rear areas after long delays, exhausted and difficult to recognize as a formed unit. Their accounts were incomplete, shaped by fatigue and shock, and focused less on combat than on waiting, on messages that received no reply, and on the silence where support had been expected. Their words carried little weight. Larger battles demanded attention, and reports filled with higher numbers and clearer outcomes took priority. Official records listed missing men without precise locations and units without final positions. No after-action report reconstructed the sequence of events. No citation preserved the stand. The absence was not deliberate, but it was complete. As time passed, the trench filled in. Rain leveled what remained, grass covered the scars, and the road aged quietly beside ground that no longer suggested what it had contained. By the time the war ended, the place appeared ordinary and unremarkable, and families waited for letters that never came or received brief notices that explained nothing. The unit had slipped out of the record, not erased by decision but left behind as history moved forward through other names and other places. What remained was only the fact that a position had been held, that reinforcements had been promised, and that waiting had continued until there was no one left to continue it. These stories are rarely told. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one.